Hi, welcome to Insights and Perspectives from the League of Women Voters. We're really happy to have you join us today and to meet our very special guest. Dr. Larry Gerston is with us, and we are so delighted for so many reasons.
Great to be here.
Yes. Larry is the author of 11 books, and you may have seen him on television, the NBC. He is the political analyst, and he's been doing that for 32 years. You can catch him on Tuesdays or Saturdays, or Sundays, excuse me, Sunday mornings. But he's also appeared on CBS, on CNN, PBS, BBC. Gee, I could just go on alphabet soup, I think, Larry.
All kinds of initials.
Yes. His columns have been shown in the Mercury, in the Chronicle, and actually in the LA Times as well. The other thing about Larry is that he is a service learning expert, and I am so impressed by this and everything he has done. He has led workshops. I've attended some of his lectures over the years, and he's presented these all over the country, and even, I think, in foreign places as well. Yes. And it's his book, which I just had to bring and share with you. Yes, it's old, but it is such a marvelous book. And it's called Public Policy Making in a Democratic Society. And this book has a quote in it, which is so League, and I just have to read this to you. It's on page 162, Larry, in case you've forgotten. Yes. Obligation is not only an element of citizenship, but an imperative for protecting the integrity of the political process. The more we take an active part in the well-being of the political process, the more we practice democracy. And it's a great challenge, and it's one the League tries to step up to and to meet on a regular basis.
That's a wonderful thing for the League to be doing, too.
Right. Today we're going to talk about California specifically, because he's written a new book, and the new book is Not So Golden After All, The Rise and Fall of California. And this one, you call California government short-sighted. And the book is full of all kinds of rich stories as well as rich examples of what this is all about and why we are where we are. But short-sighted. Larry, could you explain that a little bit to us?
Sure. You know, it's not just really that our government is short-sighted, the institutions, but those people who run the institutions, the various interest groups who are seeking their pound of flesh at the expense of others who are short-sighted. They are short-sighted. And I have to say the voters are short-sighted because we never think about the end game. We think so much about what should happen right now, and we think mostly about ourselves and our own needs. Well, in the process of thinking about ourselves and our own needs, we lose sight of the greater good. And that is California's weakness. There are so many different groups and individuals and institutions at work clawing out their piece of the state that somewhere along the way the totality gets lost. And that's the unfortunate part.
The big picture.
The big picture,
Yeah.
It really is. California in some ways is like a jigsaw puzzle gone bad. There's so many wonderful pieces, but they never quite fit. And the problems are not going away, they're only getting worse.
Our November election, would you say that was an example of some of these problems?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in so many respects. I mean, one respect, of course, I know the League is interested in this, has to do with money. The tremendous amount of money. Just the 11 ballot propositions alone received more than $430 million. And not only that, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of money. I mean, you know, their countries don't have a GDP that much.
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
but in addition to that, we're talking about situations where individuals, wrote checks of phenomenal amounts, $30, $40 million for a particular proposition one way or the other. Again, that's if that's not buying an outcome, it's the next thing to it. Not to mention, when we look at those ballot propositions, the millions of dollars that were spent in many cases by single individuals or prominent groups to qualify those initiatives.
Before they even got on the ballot.
Before they even got on the ballot. So this process, which Hiram Johnson once said more than 100 years ago, when he thought of it, along with others, said, in the ideal world, every Californian will be his own legislature. The idea was to actually control interest groups, most notably the railroad, which had its hands in the pockets of all California legislatures, or most of them. And so this way we'll get around it by letting the people legislate what the legislators fail to do.
And that's the initiative and the referendum and the recall.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this has been corrupted. It's just been corrupted.
Right. So that progressive age that he initiated has gone, well, some of it is still okay, I believe, but is it partly because of the size of our state? We are a nation unto ourselves, practically?
I think there's several reasons. One reason is because of the ease with which you can qualify an initiative. That's one reason.
All right.
A second reason has to do with vast amounts of money. There are no campaign limits on how much someone can spend on an initiative. So someone can go ahead and just plop a bunch of money in there, even at the last minute. As we saw with one proposition, $11 million practically the last day came in from someone we don't even know about.
And that we still don't know, do we?
The Fair Political Practice Commission is still trying to get to the bottom of it. I'm not so sure they ever will, their good efforts notwithstanding. So you've got those kinds of things. And then the third reason is the voters themselves. The voters are confused, uninformed. Quite often these initiatives, I know they're written in English, I recognize every single word, but you put them together and I can't make sense of it. If I can't make sense of it, how can I expect somebody who is in a normal world, not my crazy world, to make sense of it? And so we tend to vote on things that we often don't understand, just trusting that they will work. So you put those things together and you've got a system in big trouble. And we're as responsible for it as anybody else. But it certainly isn't helping the state get out of its mess. It's not all the problems, but it's certainly a big part of it.
A big part, right. I noticed like Brown got his tax bill, our initiative, passed. Do you think that will make a difference in what we will have to work with in the future? Is that a step towards the right direction?
A step. I'll tell you why. It's a holding pattern.
Okay.
It puts us in a holding pattern. When the legislature passed the budget last June, they did so assuming, talk about hubris here, assuming that the voters would pass that initiative, and then those dollars would then fill up what was missing. So they did, to everyone's surprise. Jerry Brown carried that initiative by himself. Nobody could have done it, I think, but him. It's amazing.
Right.
So the good news for people, I think, especially those of us worried about education funding, the good news is that we're not losing more money. Okay, fine. Meanwhile, what we have is a system, a revenue system in this state that is in great need of repair. If you look at the general fund, 62% of all the dollars going into the general fund come from one source, the income tax. That's it. And that percentage has grown dramatically over the last 25 years, to the point that, when the economy hums, lots of income taxes coming in. When the economy slows, it's like a wave going out, the tide going out.
And we certainly had that.
Right. And so the state becomes extremely unbalanced and difficult to run. We have been sorely lacking alternative revenue sources, which have not come to be. Why? Because in most cases, those groups protecting those sources have worked hard to keep the legislature from doing anything about it. And we have a constitutional provision, thanks to Proposition 13 of many years ago, that requires an absolute 2/3 vote of the legislature to pass any tax. You put these things together, and suddenly we're limited to just a couple of revenue sources, which makes it very, very dangerous for the state year to year.
The fact that we have practically a one-party system, you would think that we'd be able to move more effectively in terms of the law and changing things.
We will see, and I say we will see is because this is the first time since 1883,
Wow.
that the Democrats have a 2/3 majority in each house and the governor.
Okay.
More importantly, it's the first time since Proposition 13 was passed
That's what I was
that
thinking.
you have that combination. The Democrats have a window, 2 years, because it's hard to believe that they'll be able to continue that kind of domination
Yeah.
2 years from now. But isn't it sad that the system has to get to such a lopsided degree
Yes.
that one party has to be so weakened that's the only way we can get legislation passed? Again, that's because of that 2/3 requirement. It's a killer. It's the highest requirement in the nation.
In the nation?
Yeah, in the nation.
Oh, my. I think it's really a test of the Democratic Party.
Well, the question is, how responsible will they be?
Yeah,
One of the
absolutely.
clear statements by Governor Jerry Brown, and he, if nothing else, has been very clear, is that he will not sign on to any other tax increases unless, like Proposition 30, they are approved by the voters.
people,
And
yes.
it's not likely that there'll be another proposition of that ilk. There may be propositions that make it easier to
Okay.
pass things such as parcel taxes and sales tax increases by perhaps 55% instead of 2/3. Those things are in the offing and may well be on the
That's
2014 ballot.
an interesting idea.
But the
right.
idea of raising any other new taxes through the legislature this year, even though they have the 2/3 vote, Brown has said he'll veto it.
Okay. Well, and he's a man of his word, isn't he?
He's a man of his word, and he's a man you dare not cross.
Right. Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's actually, I think, an unhealthy thing to have one party that strong and one party that weak. It's not really good for,
You're right.
for our democratic system in the small d. Yeah.
When you have a system where one party dominates, it's very easy for that party to lose sight of its mandate, misunderstand its mandate, and a little bit of hubris gets involved here. You know, we can do anything we want, and there goes the accountability.
Right.
So, but we're kind of caught, you know, between a rock and a hard spot, simply because of that 2/3 requirement. You got to get to one party dominating so much, you know. Otherwise, that minority party with just one more vote than a third in either house.
Yeah.
Can stalemate the whole process. Well,
Right.
that's bad too.
Yes.
So it gets to the system. It isn't so much the legislature. It isn't so much the Democrats and the Republicans. It's that 2/3 requirement. That, I think, has to be changed somewhere down the road.
Yeah, that's a killer. The financial disclosure, we've already mentioned that, and the fact that we probably will not find out where some of that money came from at the last minute. And that the whole money system, as you've already mentioned, is just horrifying, absolutely horrifying.
Well, the biggest problem for me is not money per se. You know, I believe there's no way you can really control money in politics. You can put every rule on there, how much a person can give. There's always a way to get around it. So his wife or her husband or the kids or the dog or somebody, you know,
Yeah.
gives the money. For me, the real issue is transparency. We should, two things need to happen. The public needs to know where every dollar comes from, or at least be allowed to know where every dollar, and then go ahead and decide what you want to do. You know, then you know at least. And the other thing is, of course, that there must be, in my judgment, a provision where the state makes that a requirement. That not only do dollars come in, but we know exactly who's behind those dollars, and it's published in one way or another.
Yes.
Let the public see, let the bright light shine, and then we can move from there.
And with the technology we have, I think that type of thing should be much more available.
Eminently doable, especially these days with what people can put online, but you've got to get the legislation requiring that light to shine.
Yes, right. It's one thing to have the skill or the ability, it's another thing to use it. Yeah, so true, so true. The initiatives have been a study of the League, and we're going to take a little break here and watch one of our fun facts, which, of course, we are always into education with the League. And so here we go. We'll see if we can answer. And that was a good one and very timely with Lincoln up for an Academy Award and a quote from him. And of course, he was quite a character. If anyone's read any of his materials. Your book, which is interesting to me, is the fact that it covers a lot of the history that have gone into making California what it is. And you have a quote from Jimmy Carter, which I just think is a hoot. You said that, or he said, whatever starts in California, unfortunately, has the inclination to spread. And I had to laugh over that. Because both good and bad, culturally, as politically, socially, we do tend to be a leader, and in that case, we get criticized.
Well, if we're not a leader, we're certainly among the leaders. I mean, if you look at things like, the evangelical movement has had an early start in this state, go back more than 100 years, and that contributes to the politics. If you look at things like bohemians and hippies, too, that had a start in the state. The anti-Vietnam War movement in this state. The tremendous immigration patterns in this state, which have since filtered across the country. Well, they started here, largely here, not entirely, but largely. And if you think about it, so many of the nation's problems can be seen here. Things all the way from water shortages to dealing with immigrants in ways that are constructive, to the idea of assault weapons, one of the strongest assault weapon bans here in California.
Absolutely.
So many, and of course, how can we overlook something like gay marriage?
Oh, yes.
Now, California hasn't passed it, but the fact of the matter is that discussion has been vibrant in this state for many, many years.
Yes.
So we are a boiling pot. Of many issues in California. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I think sometimes we tend to look just at the top. What are the institutions doing? What are the leaders doing? No. They are reflective of all these things and values that have been percolating in this state for more than 100 years.
Yes, right. We are a fascinating state. There's no question about it. And as you've mentioned, some of those things that have spread really are for the better and for the good. And for the example, the assault weapon, we've been way ahead on that. And our own Senator Feinstein has stood up many times and is certainly standing up right now for that.
Well, of course, she was the primary author of the 1994 assault weapons ban, which had a 10-year life. And I've never quite understood all that, why some laws have lives and one laws are quote, permanent. And it expired in 2004. And really, we must understand, not only Republicans, but Democrats beyond Feinstein and a couple of others didn't lift much of a finger either. So it was fairly agreed across the spectrum that law would not be extended. And so now we're back to that discussion all over again.
Right. Something like Prop 13, it would have been nice to have had a sunset clause on that, but it didn't happen.
And Prop 13, not only has Prop 13 taken away, according to the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association, more than $600 billion in property taxes, most of which would go to local governments, not only, which means fewer public safety officers, fewer parks that are opened, fewer senior centers that can be opened, libraries closing, all these things. Not only has that happened, but Prop 13 was the proposition that inserted that absolute 2/3 requirement for raising taxes.
Right, which we've talked about, absolutely. One of the things that I think is interesting, and it's come out, Brown says the money now for schools and for education is going to be pushed back down to a local level, and the local level will have more control over it. Do you see that happening, or how that might affect us?
Jerry Brown wants to do two things. He wants to give more decisions to local school districts, and he also wants to come up with a formula that goes beyond the general statewide funding per capita, per student, and add more money to the poor districts, to the districts with high dropout rates. I think he's going to have a battle on that. It may be fine and welcome by inner city schools, by poor schools. But if you
like
think
Los
about
Angeles?
Yeah, or certainly parts, yeah. But if you think about it, Suburban school districts,
Okay.
places like that, I think will fight it pretty hard. So I have no idea how that's going to go. But there's a larger question here that's fascinating me, and that is the effort to move programs that have been run largely by the state back down to the local level. You've mentioned education. We've seen this with prison realignment.
Oh.
There's also discussions now of moving mental health programs down to the local level. The feeling is they're better handled locally, and the state would provide the necessary money. The question is, and I don't know the answer, the question is, by giving more power to these local governments to do things for their own folks, have we lost some sort of state standards in the process? And if that's the case, are we doing as much good as we hoped, or are we creating more of a problem in terms of great disparities between one area and the other? I don't know the answer, but I think a lot of political scientists particularly are going to be studying the relationship between the state and local governments to see how this all pans out.
Right, right. An interesting thing to follow, I would think. Right. And of course, it'll reflect those local communities and the people you were talking about that really drive this crazy state.
Well, we already know that there's some great differences. If you look right here in Santa Clara County, because of the capabilities of some school districts to raise vast amounts of money through parcel taxes that they vote on day and night, education funds, associations, some school districts in this county spend twice as much per capita as others. Guess what? There's an outcome there.
Yes, absolutely.
In the first set, you've got the kids getting out, nobody drops out, they all go on to four-year colleges, they're success. In the second set, you've got kids dropping out at rates of 40 and 50%, high crime, you name it.
Yeah.
Well, money does generate results. People don't like to think about that, but money does generate results.
Right. I walked into a classroom where all the kids had walked in with their own computers. Now, mind you, there were a range of computers. Some were very new and some were very old, but they all had one. And they had to have one for the coursework that they were doing. It would not happen in many of our schools. It couldn't.
No, and as that great disparity grows, it backs into that question about giving more power to local governments if they're so uneven. And that's why I think it's a two-sided question. How it plays out, I don't know. But until we find some way to provide sufficient funding, and this is a state now that ranks 47th or 48th in per capita funding for education.
Yes.
We're battling it out with Alabama and Mississippi.
It's just pitiful.
Right, so until we come up with some way of raising those folks at the bottom, you kind of wonder how giving out money to local governments to say, you guys handle it any way you want, how that's really going to play. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. There's many questions, isn't there, that surround our state and what our future will look like and what we can do as individuals.
Yes, and the thing is that's so wonderful about the state is there's so many opportunities for us to speak out. You know, we do. We have these opportunities. I worry that we don't take advantage of those opportunities, whether it's going down to a local city council meeting or holding a sign in front of some place you don't like or writing your member of Congress. That's where it's incumbent upon us as citizens to do our share.
Right, right. And of course, as a league member, we're into that type of education. So when you do speak up, you know what you're talking about. And that's a real important feature of our organization. And the latest, of course, has been our study on the initiative process. And we will be meeting, in fact, at the next week to vote to see if we've come to a consensus. And that should be an interesting discussion.
It sure will.
Yes, absolutely. Larry, what are you doing next then? You've accomplished so much with your book, and I know you're still teaching and actively influencing these young people, which is so important, and getting them to be involved in our community.
I have started a new book. It's called Broken Engagement.
Oh, okay.
And it's a book on how Americans have gone adrift from their country and what we can do to get them back.
Oh.
And when I say adrift, I mean, to me, citizenship is much more than a piece of real estate or putting the flag out on July 4th. or doing these kinds, or you know, saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Citizenship means participation. It means involvement. It means rights and obligations. We've lost that. Wealthy people are leaving because they don't want to pay taxes. Poor people have given up because they can't get in. Corporations are storing trillions of dollars overseas.
Overseas, yes.
And we're offshoring. All this in the name of doing good for everybody but country.
Right.
So my latest book that will take a while to do is this book, Broken Engagement. And,
Yes.
you know, you do a lot of thinking when you write these
Right.
things, and I'm looking forward to getting it done one of these days.
Yes. Well, keep working.
Thank
Your
you.
work is valuable to us all.
Thank you.
And all the kids that you work with. And we are so happy that you could be with us today. And not that we've solved any problems.
If it were that easy, we would have solved them a long time
Yes,
ago. But it's great to work on them.
Yes, absolutely. And we will continue with our efforts with the League.
Thank you.
And the League, of course, has a website that people can go to, and it's www.lwvsjsc.org. And Smart Voter, of course, is an award-winning website, and you're familiar with that one, Larry.
Yes.
And that's available at all the time. If it's an election going on, you will find current information about all the issues on there. Always non-partisan and very valuable information, and links to other very valuable ones.
A plug for Smart Voter. I use it. It tells you information about the candidates,
Yes.
who their supporters, what the issues are. If you really want to know, and you want to know in a way without somebody saying it in a slanted format,
Yes.
go to Smart Voter.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today.